Hi, I'm Gary Young.
And I'm Carys Sofoko. Every week, Gary and I will be talking about the stories in the news that we think over-reported.
And the ones that are going completely under the radar and not talked about enough.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar. And if you want to support the show, we now have a Patreon. Lots of people working on the show are doing so unpaid. So if you want to support us, search for Over the Top and Under the Radar on Patreon.
And this week, we've got a special guest, leader of the RMT, Mick Lynch.
So thanks for joining us today. Obvious first question. Looks like we're about to get a Labour government on the 4th of July, probably with a massive majority, although we're recording this before the vote. So anything could happen. How are you feeling about it?
Well, I'm not excited, but it's not like you're on the eve of 1945. Attlee government change is coming. But I will be delighted when the Tories get defeated on the night, and as a consequence, because I think the whole country's come to the conclusion, no matter what your views are, this lot have got to go. And I put it very simply. My view is, in order to get this lot out, we've got to put the other lot in, which is Starmer and his team. I'm not tingling with bated breath, if that's an expression.
It's not.
Because it's going to be, it might be a new one, but it's going to be a managerial consensus business relationship that they've got. And we've got, my view in general is that the trade union movement, progressive people, activists, campaigners have got to put the new government under a lot of pressure. Now, I think they're going to get 10 years.
Do you think they'll get 10?
Well, because I can't see the Tories recovering in time, but you never know these days.
I thought that when Labour lost in 2019, I thought, we're going to have this lot for 10 years.
Yeah.
And yet here we are.
But we have had them for 14 years, so
That's
it's
true.
a different iteration of the Conservatives. But my view is that we've had Thatcherism for 44 years, or more, 45 years now, and it was undiluted by Blair. In fact, it was accelerated in some ways. And I think a lot of the problems we've got in our society, no matter where you look, there's a problem. Housing, education, health, obviously, care for our elders, transport, whatever you want to name, there are deep-seated problems, and they all come from Thatcherism, the loss of the idea of public service and public ownership, and it's all going to be done by outsourced, low-paying, rip-off companies, is what I think is besetting us. And that's got to change, but that's a long-term project to change that around.
I was going to say, electing a Labour government in 97, and they're in power for 13 years, and it was a continuation, and you say in some ways an acceleration of Thatcherism. Are we not getting a choice between two kinds of Thatcherism now?
I don't think Starmer is a Thatcherite. I think Blair was. He believed that the paradigm, as I say, had been shifted over and there was nothing you could do about it. And to be modern, this third way, as it was called, it doesn't matter who the supplier is. I think it's essential who the supplier is in public service and housing. So I don't think he is, but I think he is managerial. He thinks he's above politics in some way, and you haven't got to have a belief system. And that's the really worrying thing. I understand when politicians fail, things don't work out the way you want them to work out, for all sorts of reasons, politics, world events, the climate. But if you haven't got a belief system that you can identify, it's very difficult to say whether they have let you down, because he's going around telling everybody, without saying it, I don't actually believe in anything. That's what his election statement should be.
Yeah. Believes in growth.
Believes in growth, but you can't identify where it's going to come from and how you achieve it and what type of growth you're after. You could have a really rotten set of growth like the Big Bang under Thatcher, which caused loads of growth but caused loads of inequality, and it caused them to cover up what was going to happen to council housing, for instance.
And for those who don't know, the Big Bang was the term for the liberalisation of banking and the finance industry. I'll simplify it and you guys remember it better than me because I was a babe in arms. But it was basically deregulate banking, finance, let that part of the economy grow and deliberately squash or shrink manufacturing because those aren't the kind of jobs that we want.
Yeah. And sell off a bunch of public assets as well.
Yes, and feed that into that capitalist machine. I mean, we've had the energy crisis the last couple of years, and nobody has mentioned, not one Labour politician or any commentator, that the majority of those assets used to be in public ownership. British Petroleum, one of the largest corporations of the world, was owned by the state. British Gas obviously was owned by the state. We could have controlled the prices even on a temporary period by direction from the minister. And that would have resolved the energy crisis. They could have just said, for this next year, on a rolling 6-month programme, we are directing that British Gas and British Petroleum will produce energy at this price. Nobody said that that's what we should be doing, and it's what we could have done in the 70s.
So why... I understand you say you're not excited about a Labour government, but why should anyone vote Labour if they're not even going to talk about that stuff?
Because we've got a crisis. We've got an ongoing crisis. If we get another version of the Tory government, it will go even more right-wing. I said during the Sunak Truss election, you can take your pick in the Tory party, but the working class and working people are going to be the ones that lose. It's Hobson's choice. And if the Tories in some way revived, I don't know where we would be, because what more can they do about the rhetoric about migration and religion and Gaza and all the rest of it? Now, Starmer's not helping that, and it's very hard for people like me to support him. But we have an electoral system in this country that only allows us to have one or the other. I mean, I've just come back from Ireland. They've got elections coming up there, and they've just had elections. They've got this single transferable vote, proportional representation. You've got a completely different set of politics. But having said that, if we had proportional representation in this election, Reform would probably get 70 or 80 MPs. It would be like France, and that is a danger in itself. So we need to have that discussion, but we must vote in a way, and I'm not against tactical voting, by the way, because as many Tories lose, the happier I'll be. But we must get them out. And the only vehicle for that is Starmer's Labour Party at the moment.
So I want to go back to something you said at the beginning, which was like, we're going to have to put pressure on him. So your plan, once Labour is in, because they will be differently receptive to union demands, do you think?
I think that's my question.
Do you think? Will they be different? And is there a plan for that pressure?
Well, there is, as far as I'm concerned, because I go to something called the TUC General Council, which is all the general secretaries coming together of the trade union movement, and I'd say to them, we have got to stand up as an independent workers' movement, not as an adjunct or an attachment to the Labour Party. Some are affiliated to the Labour Party, my union isn't, and we have to put them under real pressure, and we'll find out which way he's going to go the morning after the election when he appoints that cabinet, which is crucial. So if certain key people who are generally women like Angela Rayner, Louise Haigh and others are not in important positions, the positions they've got now. So Louise Haigh is the Shadow Transport Secretary. She's got a really good plan, I think, that we can work with on public ownership of rail. And if Angela Rayner is not in charge of this New Deal for workers, which is crucial to everyone, especially young workers...
Is it a good deal?
It's not a great deal. It is good, but, you know, you don't make perfect the enemy of the good. It could be better, but when I'm talking about a 10-year term, I see this as the first instalment of what Labour is going to have to do under pressure from us, the activists, about getting a square deal at work. We also have to put them under pressure on things like housing. You know, Generation Rent is out there demanding all this stuff. They don't really know how they're going to get it because there's not a national council housing campaign. People don't know what it was like when council housing was the dominant provider of housing for working class people. So we've got to put them under a lot of pressure about every single angle that they're being very quiet about. And the trade union movement has got to be at the core of that and mobilise activist groups, especially people under 40, who don't, in my opinion, know how, maybe I'm being patronising here, and forgive me, listeners, if that's, but we've got to know how to campaign en masse through proper channels that are really going to put these politicians under pressure.
Well, I think that's the main question I have for you, I guess, is about power. Because I think that you talked about activists and progressives, and I think I'm not in that younger generation of people who are, you know, I was politicised by the Iraq War, was on one of probably at the time the biggest demonstrations, and like what we learned was it didn't matter. And not to say those demos had no impact, Gary, and I've talked about this at length. But
you are under 40 though.
I'm under 40, and it was, and I grew up in social housing, so I do know the benefit of it. But I think that sense of, definitely for me, and I know for other generations, I've experienced a lot of the left losing. Since I've...
Well, you want to try my life?
Well, I guess
I left school in 1978 and we've been losing ever since.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think when I think about the RMT, and not just you, but over my lifetime, kind of does feel like you do win and you do have political power. And I've, a friend's little brother was an RMT member, and he was proud to go on strike and to be like, we can bring London to a standstill, and I earn a good wage and I didn't go to uni. And I don't know, what do you say to other people about power and how
we
you
win
have
the majority
power?
of things? And these strikes we've been involved in, that people have been reading about and seeing, have been about preserving terms and conditions. And most people under 40 don't even know what terms and conditions are. So getting sick pay, being on the books with a company, a lot of people don't even know what that is because they're self-employed or meant to be self-employed. Having a final salary pension, as we used to call it, that's going to be with you till the day you die.
Yeah, I'm not going to have one of those.
Real value. But we used to have all these things, and the RMT does fight, and we win, and we've preserved a lot of that. But around us, our working class colleagues and friends and communities are collapsing. So if you're like me, getting on in the world with grown-up kids and all that, and much of my generation have got grandkids, they are never going to know, if it goes on like this, what good council housing is like, what free education to the third level is like, where you don't have a lifetime of debt, where the NHS is fully funded, where you feel that you're making progress on equalities. Because when I was a kid, we lived in a really racist world, right? A really misogynistic world. When I started work, it was horrifying. And I'm white, and I was horrified by what I saw. It was disgusting in factories. But the world has improved, and we felt, because of that consensus that was laid down in a previous age, the Harold Wilson government in the 60s put some legislation that is still with us, the Race Relations Act, Health and Safety at Work Act, Sexual Equality Act, and all that. You can't break those legacies, which is what we need to be doing. So we need to teach people the history and how the history since Thatcher has been a history of decline in many ways, and the degradation of our society. So that's one of our missions. The RMT cannot change Britain on its own. We need a mass movement of working people, which I think will be facilitated by the trade unions, it should be. And the trade unions have to spread out so that they're more for people that aren't necessarily going to benefit directly from being in a union, but want to get the value of what the unions can do, which is why we need this Employment Act and give us industry-wide and economy-wide bargaining power.
And why do you think the RMT has been relatively effective, and why are you powerful as a union?
Well, because we work hard. Work hard at doing
Obviously,
it, and that's
very
not
good at your job, very hardworking.
That's a really, we're prepared to take the action to go on strike, to educate our members that striking is a legitimate and useful tool. That if you've got a mandate for industrial action, you get to bargain rather than beg. And it's something like that the doctors have come to realise. So the BMA spent years, quite a conservative organisation, having access to the Tories, and the Royal College of Nursing were down that road as well, and thought they'd get a better deal than unions. In the last 2 years, they've had to become proper trade unions, take extensive strike action, because that's not working anymore, because they're lobbying, and lobbying doesn't work, especially with the politicians that we've got in at the minute, because unless you've got money or power, they won't listen to you. And that's what we've got to balance out.
So when you're in the General Council and you're talking to your fellow trade unionists, and you say, we're going to have to put Labour under pressure from day one.
Yeah, they think I'm Kevin the teenager.
Yes.
I think I'm having a tantrum.
So unfair.
How do they respond? And to that extent, is a lot of the fight going to be with them as much as it is with the government?
Yeah, and life is like that. You've got to keep your end up. You've got to have your principles, have a pragmatic approach as well, and realise that other people go about things in different ways. So we're going to have to lobby. That's why I do as much media as I can to get these ideas out there. And some of the people that have got the other ideas don't do as much media, but they may be going around the back to talk to certain politicians about getting some amelioration rather than changes in the fundamentals. So, yeah, that's a constant battle, and I have to convince the TUC that having a more strident and militant approach with a Labour government is the way forward. But some people are scarred from the 70s, I've got to tell you.
And how's that been going with the TUC? Scarred from the 70s was like 50 years ago.
Yeah, but it's a corporate memory in the TUC. Okay. You lot are both too young to remember that, but I remember when people like me were on telly constantly, and our conferences used to be covered live on television, the TUC. So there is a corporate memory that if you get too high profile and too stroppy, people fall out of love with unions. But I think it's gone back the other way. So we will have to win that argument. But in the last couple of years, their members have pulled them to that position because the pay and the funding of public services is so desperate at the minute. the BMA never thought they'd be on sustained strike action, and they're on strike action, what is it, for 4 or 5 days the week of the election to make that mark and write on them, because they've got to tell New Labour we're still here. Not New Labour, the Labour we've got, whatever they're called, or the New Labour government, that we're still here and we're on strike until July the 3rd, I think it is. And that's a message. And I'll be saying to Labour, you've got to settle that dispute. And the only way you can do that is by putting some funding into the settlement. You can't do it without money, even though Rachel Reeves appears to say you can do everything with money, that we're going to knit an economy at home or in some fashion of our own resources. It can't happen.
Well, I'm interested in talking about the doctor strikes, but I think that your profile got raised quite a lot during I think it's like 2 strikes ago, when you sort of blew up and were on social media, and you talked about that institutional memory of, and I listened to some interviews you've done of like union barons, and a few journalists have presented you as a union baron. How has it felt being a bit of a celebrity or having a bit of profile, and what do you think has changed from when, say, Bob Crow was general secretary, that now you have, you know, a swathe of people who are really sympathetic to what you've got to say, who think that you're representing their politics? Like, what's shifted?
I think the change with Bob was a really powerful, impressive trade unionist and a great big character and all that, which was really useful to us. But the social media wasn't there in the same way. This clipping of stuff that you get even off the mainstream media wasn't there, so he couldn't cut through. But I think for me, it's really odd. I'm an old geezer, as you can see, and not somebody who ought to be in the limelight, really, given the way the world is. So I'm bimbling along the road and people stop me and shake my hand. I thought, well, do they want directions or something? But you know, I find it very natural. I mean, speaking to you for me is just like speaking to a couple of friends or people I've just met. Yeah. That's the way I try to deal it. I don't say I'm going to get you to these journalists that people claim I have. But after a while, you do get a bit of intolerance of people who are asking you really stupid questions that they should have read a paragraph about before.
I'm intrigued by how you keep your cool in those situations where you're being kind of gaslit and they're effectively taking the piss or saying things that are untrue.
Yeah.
Because it looks like you're sort of zen.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I do lose my temper, but not so far in the media. But I come from a background of, in my family, we're very good arguers and good strident stuff. In pubs with all my mates over the last 40 or more years, probably too many years, considering I shouldn't have been in pubs. But also on building sites and mess rooms on the railway and in factories, you've got to stand your ground. And being a lefty, being a trade unionist, and I'm not particularly left politically, but that's just the way the world is, Gary. But compared to where the political spectrum is, I'm not. I'm a pragmatic democratic socialist. But it just looks that I'm left wing because everyone else has shifted off and buggered off to the right. But standing your ground in the early days of Thatcher as a young bloke doing an apprenticeship, when a lot of trade union members became alienated from what we were doing, was a tough job. And if you'd got wound up by that, you wouldn't have lasted very long. So, you know, I started my apprenticeship at 16 in a factory in 78. This is under Callaghan. I've been around so long. And, been through all that and had to... If you think wokeism is under attack now, you should have seen it in 1980 or 81 when it was full on, the attacks on people of colour, people of different views, people of the left.
Reds under the bed, my granddad used to say.
It was all that, why don't you go and live in Russia and all this kind of nonsense that we used to get. So I think I've just had to put up with it a long time. But equally, our union culture is that, you debate things out. You stand up, you speak, you make a point, which is really good education. It's not done always formally. But when you go along to a branch meeting, there might be 20 people there, but they say, we've got standing orders, you've got to stand up, move this 5 minutes, listen to the debate, and you get a right to reply. It does give you some ability to think on your feet, but also be patient a bit till the question's finished and then get on with an answer. So don't butt in, all right?
So I'm as a ever so slight departure, but not a huge. I want to talk to you a bit about your Irish heritage, because both of your folks are from Ireland.
Yeah.
Your Irish identity is important to you.
Very important. Yeah.
I wonder how that shaped your politics.
A lot, if I'm honest.
Particularly given the time when you
So
grew
my
up.
mother was from the border in the north, but South Armagh, across McGlen, some people will know it. And my father was from Cork City, and they're quite old. People wouldn't believe how old they would be now, but they had to come here in the war. Everyone had to leave Ireland, but there was nowhere else to go because you couldn't go to America or Australia. So I could have been an Irish American in theory, but they met here. And there was a tremendous waves of migration. And Irish people made a big impact on this country, culturally and physically, building it and all the rest of it. And of course, they lived, many of them, cheek by jowl with migrants from the Caribbean, especially in my area, but also people from South Asia. So that changes you. You've got to know the accents. You've got to know where everybody's come from without being a pain, asking them all the time. So my mates in my school were from places like St. Lucia and Dominica, which is different to Jamaican culture, which is the dominant Caribbean culture. And you soon found out that people from Dominica and St. Lucia didn't really want to hear about Jamaican culture all the time because it was the one that was overriding their view of the world. So I was quite tuned into that and I was really interested in it. And of course, we had the Troubles. So I was born in 62. This was the Troubles in Northern Ireland. 68, it was all going off and into the early 70s as I was getting more and more mature. And we discussed that a lot. And being Irish, it marked you out as different, but you could assimilate very quickly. If I'm in a pub and I want to be, maybe not now, but if I want to just be the Englishman, I can just do that as well, or be the Londoner.
Do that now?
Well, yeah, but people are going, we know who you are.
Oh, right, no, fair enough. Yeah.
But, it's quite different. You could hear people telling racist jokes all the time or saying this about the Irish, and you take it on board. But equally, I don't know when I overplayed it. I think Diane Abbott's remarks, funnily enough, were very accurate. I don't know, most black people, the one about you could be Polish, you could be Irish, you could be ginger, but you'll never know what it's like to be black living in this society. It wasn't put the best way, but
I was going to say...
I know exactly what she means, though.
I know what she meant.
My mates would have told me, in fact, they did tell me that, because I used to go, well, I'm Irish, I understand some of it, and they go, no, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't.
I mean, I do understand.
And it's true, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I understand what she was saying, but I think that she didn't quite say that.
It was clumsy.
I personally, interestingly, the runner also, I kind of thought it was wrong, but that kind of but I knew what she meant, and an apology would have been the apology.
But I think
that she
it's
gave
also
was
the
fine.
thing of what can you say in print in a national newspaper and what can you say in the pub. And I do think I grew up in South London again in like a very mixed working class community, and I think that there is and. I'm not Diane Abbott. She's a politician. She's been in politics. It was a letter to the Observer. I'm not saying it was appropriate.
You make your mistakes and you suffer or get the benefit.
Yeah, but I do think those kind of conversations you can have with friends of different heritage, you do speak a bit more. Like, you don't speak in a sort of clipped, formal way, and it is different. And I think the saddest thing is actually that people who grew up in multi-ethnic communities, like, there's a bit more comfort with it. Like, it's not, you're not scared to say, oh yeah, my friend who is black, and like that slightly. So I think I get what the sentiment might have been. I don't think she expressed it well, but I think you do learn that from growing up with people of different identities, that it's not the same experience.
But in terms of what that means politically and philosophically, so you're not growing up with God Save the King or God Save the Queen as it was. The royal family is our history. You grew up with a different version of history, which makes you I think a lot of Irish people are very interested in history. And if you've got an inquiring mind, that will take you into other groups' history and even working class history in Britain, which they've been robbed of. I think English people have been denied their own history with the Chartists and the Tolpuddle martyrs and even, Cromwell and the English Revolution and all that. They don't know anything about it. And it's far more likely that an Irish person will know about the English Civil War than an English person from the same background. And I find all that interesting. And they never question the empire and imperialism. Whereas if you're from an Irish background in Britain, you probably will question that, and then it will take you into other areas. So that's why it was a good basis for me.
So how does that intersect with your day job?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Get a lot of inquiries from Ireland, funnily enough, and do a lot of meetings in Ireland. But I'm not sitting there all the time thinking, how can I be more Irish, in this conversation or whatever. But it's more your ethos and your basis. So I spend a lot of my time speaking to people who've got no Irish connections. The railway is a national railway. It goes from the north of Scotland down to the bottom of Cornwall. And so if I go to do a meeting in Penzance, they're likely to be all, just because of the way of the world, native Cornwall people. If I go up to the northeast of Scotland in Aberdeen, they're likely to be just from that area. And many of those areas have got military heritage, which is, fine. That's what they are. And I have to deal with that. And you have to make sure that you're in tune with all of the people that you're seeking to organise. Because when people join the union, we don't say, what do you believe? What colour are you, or what was your heritage? We say, where do you work? And you've got to then say, this is the ethos of the union. How can you fit into it? And you've got to be real. People only fit into the union the way they want to. They want you to get them better pay, better conditions. And then some of them will start to become active. Some will become politically active. Some will be community active. So some people just want the bread and butter. Other people want the full deal. So I have to go around dealing with all of that and making sure I respect everyone.
The last time and the first time that I interviewed you, it was just before, we couldn't have known, that the Queen died. And once the Queen died, you called off the strikes during that period. And I remember some people on the left saying, "Oh, what did you do that for?" And I'm interested to hear your...
Well, they tend to be these people that sell these really boring newspapers, that are trying to say to you that what we need is a vanguard party. And all. It's just nonsense as far as I'm concerned. There's an awful lot of people in my union that respected the Queen. I mean, there's no point in me trying to pretend that. There's an awful lot of people in Ireland, I was over there at the funeral, who respected the Queen. Now, it doesn't matter what you and I think about that, and I didn't have a particular problem with that person, the Queen. I don't... I'm not a royalist in any way. But I bet your mums and dads might have had a view about the Queen that might be different from yours. My mum was from a Republican family, from a Republican heritage, and many of her relatives were involved. But she would have expected me to do that. You shouldn't be going on strike when the Queen's ill or when the Remembrance Day was on. We've been asked to do that. That's the country we live in. We're trying to change it for the better, but I'm not going to pretend... If I start a Republican group up in Britain today, that it's going to get any traction. You just got to live with the world you're in. So that's what we did. And we got a lot of stick for it, but we also got a lot of respect for it. And I'm only worried about what my members think on that. Right. And they supported it.
Talking of getting a lot of stick and getting, I don't know how much support you got, but you supported Brexit.
Yeah. But everyone makes out that I'm they call me a rabid Brexiteer now. I
didn't know.
Yeah, no, you didn't. Well done.
I'm just interested in how you think that has gone.
Oh, it's gone really badly. There's no doubt about that. But we were talking about this at the weekend in Ireland, about what the future of Ireland is going to be. And if there's going to be a change in the constitutional setup in Ireland, you've got to get the unionist community to vote for it. And you need to make them an offer through a prospectus, what it's going to be like, what's going to happen to their heritage, what's the politics going to be like, what's going to happen with the police, what's going to happen with tax, NHS. Everything is up for grabs. And we got a different constitutional settlement in Britain, but we didn't know what we were going to get, which is a really strange relationship. And on thinking back, we shouldn't have had that referendum in that format. We should have had a referendum about what's next. The negotiations should have happened. Now, there were people argue, and it's true, that the EU were never going to give Britain anything. They didn't give them a square deal. They didn't respect the vote as Democrats, and they didn't say they wanted to make it as hard as possible. But it didn't. The EU did, yeah. They didn't give Britain anything during that negotiation. They didn't say, well, you can have this kind of trade agreement. They said you either get it or you don't. So it wasn't a negotiation of equals and in due respect. I think the referendum went one way.
Do you think? I mean, because Britain kind of left, and they left like that.
In the end, they did, yeah. But we could have had Corbyn negotiating that in theory.
In theory, but not in practice. And so the way that Britain, I remember an account between Liz Truss and Angela Merkel. Liz Truss is saying, Angela Merkel saying, "What do you want?" And Liz Truss is saying, "Make me an offer." And she's saying, "I don't know what you want." I mean, how could the...
Yeah, that is a strange... That's what we do in negotiations. When we go in, we discuss the business that you're dealing with, not the theoretical idea of what our wages should be.
Yeah.
Because they can only pay you what they can afford. I mean, and it doesn't matter what you think about that. So, yeah, we didn't have the right people negotiating on our behalf. But we were asked a question by a desperate government that was trying to appease the right wing, and it hasn't worked out for them. because they've fed the crocodile. And if you feed a crocodile rabid right-wing zealots, you're going to lose your fingers, and then you're going to lose your hand, and then you're going to lose the Conservative Party entirely.
And I'm not trying to relitigate it.
Yeah.
I'm not. But I'm just wondering, given that was the government we had, how did you think it was going to go?
Well, the government we had was the Cameron government, not the Truss government. And we could have lost that government in an election in 17 and 19. But the Labour Party was determined to kill Jeremy Corbyn, and many of them were going, we've got to have another referendum. And they were trying to relitigate it. They weren't going to respect the vote that had taken place. So you could argue I found myself, and the union found it. This is union policy, by the way. I didn't set the policy, and I'm not disowning it. But it's been union policy since 1973 that we should leave the EEC and the European Union. So, and that's a traditional left position in Britain, that this is a capitalist club. They have put into statute and into their constitution that railways must be privatised. They're going to go further with that in Europe, that many public services should be privatised and open to tender, which would give the Corbyn manifesto that he stood on a hard time. It may well have been illegal in the European Union to do the things that Corbyn wanted to do, and Labour's rail policy at the moment may have been illegal in the European Union. So it wasn't all bread and roses. There were some difficult things, and people really didn't like it. There's a lot of people in Europe now who don't like the European Union because it's not democratic. You don't get to vote on the policies that the EU are bringing forward. The policies are decided by the Council of Ministers. Sounds like we're relitigating this, but it could have been reformed. They wouldn't give Britain any reforms, by the way, under Cameron. He went over there in a fairly ineffectual way, but they didn't give him any way out of that. They more or less said to him, you're going to have this referendum. And then he had it. And we've got what we've got. But we could have had a different outcome with a different government.
So do you have any regrets?
I regret that it's turned out the way it is, and we seem to have lost a big chunk of our economic growth. I regret the way that migrants were treated, mainly European migrants at that time. And it's regrettable that now what we've got, we've replaced a lot of white migrants with a lot of people of colour, but they're all at the beck and call of British capitalism. Nobody ever says that. The reason we pulled a lot of people from Poland, the Eastern Bloc, over was to do work that we needed doing, and that suited big business. And then we alienated them through all this process. What was it Theresa May said? The climate of
citizens of nowhere? No.
What did she say?
Hostile environment.
Hostile environment.
So a lot of them, quite rightly, went back and have built their lives back there. And now we're blaming people from all sorts of places. And in the last few weeks, it's not just been about the boats. It's been about legal migration, people who have been given visas to work here. And all of that's happened under one Tory debate. Nobody else has been involved in that, about what migration's like, how people should be treated and regarded when they come to our country. And it seems like the left has just missed out on this debate entirely, and that's got to change.
What should the left be saying about migration?
Well, I think the left has to recognise the strain on working class communities of inflows of people, and it doesn't matter where they come from. And you cannot tell people in deprived inner city communities, many of whom are not white anymore. Some of these communities are black and mixed heritage communities and all sorts of places. And if you haven't got enough resources in the economy and in the services, that has got to be dealt with. And it's the same communities absorbing migrants as it has always been. There aren't new areas of the country taking migrant workers and migrant families. So we've got to recognise that, and they're struggling with that in Ireland now, and it's creating quite a bad atmosphere. So we've got to have a fair migration system, but you've got to have a proper debate about what's Britain's view on migration in the future. There needs to be a lot of work in the inner city about getting people into better jobs. So a lot of working class people of colour are still not getting the opportunities that they should be getting in our economy. Before we have more people coming, maybe we need to give some of those people a turn to get the education and get the opportunities to go into the trades, go into the well-paid jobs, go into the professions on a more mass basis. So we've got to face up to that. That is a working class dialogue that has to be had in a non-racist, non-sectarian, atmosphere. But it's a difficult subject. There aren't easy answers to this. But it's always the same people that are having to deal with it. And it's the people from outside the community, like Farage, who's never had to live and never lived among us, if you know what I mean, that are setting the tone, which is a really bad and unfortunate thing.
I think it's a challenge because I think the reality is lots of people in this country care about migration.
Yeah.
And there are multiple experiences of migration. So there are all the people in South Wales, which is where my mum is from, who, I mean, it's a bit less white than when I was going there. But aside from the university, there aren't huge flows of, unlike a Thurrock, where people are turning up in shipping containers dead. And the problem is, you're right, Farage is the Farage of the world are setting the terms of the debate. But some communities have changed. Some communities have had huge influxes of people. Some communities have got a hotel where asylum seekers are dumped. And some communities are still incredibly
should be treated like that,
but then some communities are still incredibly white and they're all terrified of migration, but they never experience it.
Yeah.
And the problem is we haven't managed to find a way to talk to the people who have actually experienced change in their communities. But I guess the thing I might disagree with you on is, I don't know it's about how many people coming in that working class black and brown people don't have economic opportunities or jobs. I think our economy is fucked.
Yeah.
And
I agree with that.
There's a whole tier of jobs that we got rid of in the 80s that don't exist anymore. There's a whole tier of support, whether it's EMA or social housing, that we just pulled away from people. And it's really not about who comes in from where. It's about the basis of the economy that delivered some basic things to working class people is gone. I don't know how you get it back.
Yeah, well, one of the big problems is outsourcing, right? So what's really ruining working class communities is outsourcing precarious work through agencies or labour-only supply, doing these terrible jobs for big subcontractors to big companies. We've got it on the railway. So the caricature, well, not the caricature, but the image of the railway, London Transport and British Rail, let's say, going back, there were always opportunities for people, Afro-Caribbean people, in a large extent, coming in who didn't have the qualifications that you might need to go higher. And it took everyone, the railway. Now those jobs, those entry-level jobs, are largely outsourced. So if you went into British Rail as a cleaner, you could end up in the driving grade, you could end up in the booking office, all good quality working class jobs. That's denied to people entirely. It's the same in the NHS, our biggest organisation, our biggest employer. If you get a job cleaning in a hospital or doing the catering, you'll be working for an outsourced contractor, and your labour, certainly in the big cities, you'll be surrounded. All of your colleagues will be from the same circumstances of you, and you will not have the ability to move through into healthcare assistant, clerical jobs or whatever. So there's a real problem about that, and we've got to end that. But there's also the idea that how do you get, if you're living in an inner city area, how do you break into things like engineering, construction trades and all that? That used to be more accessible, and now they're not. A lot of those industries are changing. One of the ways you do it is rebuild the inner city, of course, which is in Labour's manifesto. The new Green Industrial Revolution should have been about changing working class estates, bringing back council housing, making them better, and employing people from those places to do skilled jobs in their own community, so they didn't have to go away elsewhere. So I think it's all connected up. If we've got a growing economy with a mission to change people's lives, you'll get a better deal. How that would deal with migration, because there is a vacuum, a pressure difference. If you're living in Sudan or Somalia, I've got no illusion that those people will want to get out of a dangerous situation and will want to go elsewhere to get away from it with their families. Many people want to send back remittances and all the rest of it. Now, the world has to deal with that. It's bigger than Britain. It's bigger than Europe, probably. And so if you want to talk about wealth distribution, you've got to talk about that on a global thing so that people can stay in the communities that they were brought in while having the ability to make better lives. But we're a long way from dealing with it, and it looks like the world's going to get worse. And with climate change, that you're going to have battles of resources and people escaping terrible, well, they're not natural disasters, man-made disasters. So we've got to be ready for it.
You're no fun, man.
Yeah.
You're a downer.
Yeah. But it's a big challenge, isn't it? And the way the parties are looking, none of them are looking up. Bigger picture's a cliche, but they're not looking at these things. And where Europe would have given some answer to that. But Europe is closing itself off anyway. Some of the countries are regretting that they have even the Schengen agreements and inter-migration, and they're all closing the Mediterranean down. They're not solving the problems of people in North Africa and West Africa and wherever. They're just saying, well, we'll have to put you in prison or lock you in a camp.
What I think will be the last question. I want to ask you, where do you find joy? What do you do to either relax, kick back? Mick Lynch on the beach, what does it look like?
Well,
do you do puzzles?
I've got Irish skin, so I've got to be careful about being on the beach. I do a lot of reading. I go to a lot of football. I watch a lot of football. I go to the pub.
Who do you support?
I support Brentford and Chelsea, which is a bit of a controversy. People don't like that. There's a long story about that as well. But yeah, I go and watch Ireland play games in Europe as much as I can. But yeah, music as well. I go and see bands as often as I can.
He's very partial, I know, to conversations about new wave music.
Yeah, well, it's old wave now.
Adam and the Ants.
Okay, right.
He's not my favourite, but yeah, Puck's Not Dead and all that. Yeah, but it was interesting the division when I was 18, 16, 17. It was between soul boys in West London, people into punk, and people into dub. That was the three divisions. I liked all of them. No, I did.
Liberal.
But you couldn't hardly go out and be I mean, the soul boys were generally white, but there was obviously a lot of black guys into it.
Okay.
And you had to make a choice. If you're going to be a black soul boy, you couldn't have dreads because you had to wear the smart gear.
Right.
And if you had to be a punk, I was never particularly looking like a punk, but you had very short hair. It was quite difficult to be a soul boy.
Right.
Because if you were white, you had to have one of these wedges. Remember the wedges?
Yeah. It's a bit before Carys' time.
And mohair jumpers.
Yeah.
Big long-haired jumpers. And then what undercut everybody was heavy metal in places like Stevenage.
Well, I think I was just wondering a bit about the future and kind of optimism, specifically. So your union's very successful, but it's also organising, like your organising conditions have changed, but not that dramatically. And the issue for a lot of people is work looks so different to when we were all in one factory or one steelworks or down one coal mine, and the solidarity was easier to sort of imagine and understand. Like it sounds like you've talked about your job, but you also have talked about a broader left project, and it sounds like you're someone who feels that you're an activist as well as a trade union leader. Like
We've got to broaden it out. So we need to bring the benefits of collective solidarity and collective action and organisation. It's no good having ideas if you're not organised to try and achieve them. And it's no good having political ideas unless you get political power. You just become an irrelevance and an academic, possibly. I don't know.
That's harsh.
It is harsh. He's an academic now.
Right.
Okay, so like an RMT festival?
But, do you know what I mean?
Put on a summer festival?
Well, we take part in them. I do a lot of, the Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival is coming up, but also I've been at the Trestle Festival in Dublin. So the battle for ideas and having a bit of fun and drinking some ale or whatever, we're all part of that. But I think what the coming period when we get a Labour government is a period of opportunity, but we can't let them just run. I know they're the government, but we can't let them just run it the way they want to run it, this managerial way, is going back to the beginning a bit. But we've got to make sure they're under manners, as my mother would have said. probably a lot of other people's mothers back in the day. They've got to be put under manners. And
Kids got to be put under manners.
And made to deliver for working people in lots of different places on lots of different issues. It's a really tough job they've got, by the way. Even if they were more or closer to what I would want to see, they would have a really tough battle. And the right wing is going to come down on them so hard. Last week they were saying that Starmer wants a one-party socialist state and all this stuff, and that pensioners are rapidly withdrawing all their savings and going to move to Florida. It's just nonsense. They're trying to create this scare. So if they were to do that to them, imagine what they would have done to Corbyn if he got power, or what they'll do if Labour move to the left, which is what we've got to try and achieve. So there's an opportunity coming our way, and there'll be a bit of joy. And there'll be a punk revival, and you could be at the front of it, Gary.
Mick Lynch, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, really
Thanks
good to see you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for listening to this week's Over the Top and Under the Radar bonus episode.